Hello and thank you for joining me at another Ready to Ride session. Today's session is just going to be focusing on one particular exercise, which is called the shoulder bridge. I've chosen to focus on this exercise on its own because it serves two very specific functions, and I want to go into a bit of detail on both of those parts. First of all, and this is really important for horse riders, it works on improving mobility and stability of all the different lumbar spine segments. It also goes up into the thoracic spine, that's your mid-back, but it particularly focuses on the lumbar spine. And for horse riders, that's the part of your back that really moves forwards and backwards with the horse's movement. So it's a really good exercise to get good at. The second thing with this exercise is that as you move up through the harder levels, it becomes a fantastic global core strengthener. We can also do this exercise with various pieces of equipment. I'm not going to do that today. We'll cover those when I come to do more specific exercise equipment classes. For this exercise, you don't need to have a headrest. That's because as you go up into the full shoulder bridge position, it can put a little bit of strain on your neck, and so you don't need to add to that by having something underneath your head. Likewise, if you have neck pain or if you have osteoporosis, this is not a good exercise to do for you. So I'm going to get started on my back. And you don't need to worry too much for this exercise about how good your neutral starting position is. You want to be vaguely in the right position, but you don't need to be totally perfect in quite the way you do with some of the other exercises. You need to have your hands resting onto the mat beside you, knees bent and feet and knees hip width apart. Pelvic floor as always before you start onto floor 3. And then the start of this movement is what we call imprinting. So you flatten your low back into your mat or into the floor as if you are placing an imprint of your spine onto the mat, and then you ease that pressure off and come back to your neutral position. Practice doing that 2 or 3 times, and actually as you're doing that you are nicely getting going with that segmental movement through your low back. So you're taking your spine away from its natural lordosis or natural curve and flattening it out. The progression from there, still with your pelvic floor onto floor 3, is to lift your pelvis away from the mat and gradually move each vertebrae in turn off your mat until you come to what we call the shoulder bridge position. And your resting point should be basically a straight line from shoulders, hips to knees. Keep the pelvic floor still active onto floor 3, and then starting from the middle of your back, lay each vertebrae in turn back down onto the mat, going through that imprinting position, and then finally resting back to your neutral starting position. So imprint, and then gradually lift your pelvis and each vertebrae in turn off the mat until you get to your resting point. Pause at the top, check the pelvic floor is still onto floor 3, and then lay each vertebrae back down again until you are into your imprinted position on the mat, and then rest into your nice level neutral pelvis position. Sometimes people find it quite helpful with this exercise to think of the spine as either a string of pearls or possibly a bicycle chain, where you're thinking of lifting each segment off the mat and then laying each segment back down onto the mat again. Each segment of your pearl necklace is each segment of your spine. So that's the simple version, but there are lots of ways of making this exercise harder if you feel that you want to work yourself a little bit harder than just that. So you can make it harder straight off by taking your arms away from the mat. Pelvic floor onto floor 3, imprint the spine, and then lift each segment just like you did before until you are in your straight line from shoulders, hips to knees, and then once again lay each level of your vertebrae back down again until you get to your imprinted position and then to your neutral position afterwards. That's much harder because you've taken your arms away and you've got nothing to balance on, but that's a really good progression to start off with. You can also progress from the final resting point at the top. So you come up through your segmental lift, and then you can work on a little bit of pelvic control in this position. So with your pelvic floor staying onto floor 3, you can do some hip dips. So you drop one side of the pelvis back up and drop the other side of the pelvis and back up. So you're alternating between left and right. And what's important when you are doing this is that you're aiming to only have one side dropping and you're not having both sides twisting around each other. So one side is staying still, or as still as you can keep it, and the other side drops. This is really good for getting some individualised glutes activity, but it's also very good for your body awareness. When you've done a few of those, bring yourselves back down again, so you're coming down segmentally again, getting to that imprinting point, and then resting to your neutral position. The next progression is a little bit harder, and once again it's from that resting at the top point, so you imprint and peel each level of your vertebrae up to the top. Once again, make sure the pelvic floor is still onto floor 3, and this time you're going to straighten one leg out. Bring the foot back down and straighten the other leg out. So you really need to feel that your pelvic floor are working on that floor 3 the whole time to give you that stability. What you also want with this is to make sure that your headlights stay as level as you possibly can. Now obviously I'm staying up here to demonstrate this, but you don't have to stay and keep repeating. You can do one with each leg and then bring yourselves back down by correctly segmentally lowering your spine through the imprint and back to a neutral resting point. The final progression that you can do without any equipment is to take the arms away and add in the legs. So arms up to the top, pelvic floor, imprint and into your lift, and then when you're at the top, keep the pelvic floor and then add in the leg extensions. It's pretty tricky because by the time you're doing this, you've only really got one foot back of your shoulders and your head and neck to give you balance. So there you are. It's a fantastic exercise for improving spinal mobility and global core strength. Give that exercise a go. Take it easy as you build up through the progressions. Don't try and go through the harder levels until you're really happy that you can do the lower levels. But it's also really worth practicing as often as you can that initial stage of imprinting and into the lift and then coming back down again through the imprint to your neutral position, because the more you work at that and the more natural that is for you to do, the easier you will find it when you're riding, particularly if you do have any low back stiffness, to follow the movement of your horse really naturally and to just make everything a little bit easier for you and the horse. I hope that all makes sense, and thank you for joining me, and we'll see you again very soon.